The Vorrkai Empire had in its 4,000-year history conquered exactly 237 star systems. They had crushed the Melthari Collective. They had absorbed the Fanox Dominion. They had watched the proud Solvian warriors kneel before their fleet, one by one, like dominoes made of dignity and despair. Commander Drekkath Voss had personally overseen 9 of those conquests, and not once, not a single solitary time, had anything surprised him. Until today, until her. Report, Drekkath said, standing at the observation bridge of the flagship Unbroken Verdict, arms folded behind his back like a man who was absolutely, completely, 100% in control. He was not. He just looked like it. That was the whole point of being a commander, really. You looked calm while your inside screamed. Sub-Commander Yura Tolk, his second, pulled up the data on the holographic panel with shaking hands. Yura never shook. Yura had survived 3 space battles, a decompression event, and one very awkward dinner with High Admiral Quen, without flinching once. But her hands were shaking now. Sir, Yura began, and then stopped. Yura, sir, I want you to know before I explain this, that I did check the sensors 3 times. Drekkath slowly turned his head toward her. 3 times. 4 times, actually. I lied about 3. I checked 4 times. Tell me. Yura cleared her throat, which took a moment because Vorrkai physiology gave them 2 of them. The Terran vessel, designation unknown, has been hit with a full Skorreth-class gravity lance. Direct hit, full power. The kind of hit we used on the Solvian dreadnought at Pell Station, which, as you will recall, folded like wet parchment. Yes, Drekkath said. I recall, I was there. The Terran vessel is still moving. Silence. On the bridge, 17 crew members suddenly became very interested in their individual consoles, because nobody wanted to make eye contact with the commander right now. It was the kind of silence that had texture. You could pick it up and throw it at someone. Moving, Drekkath repeated. Moving, sir? Forward. Toward us. More silence. Toward us, he said. At increased speed, sir, which I want to emphasize, is not something that should be physically possible after absorbing a Skorreth-class lance hit, and yet, here we are and here it comes. Drekkath unfolded his arms. He looked at the viewport. The Terran vessel, which according to every intelligence briefing the Empire had on file, was a mid-tier survey cruiser called the INS Petra Olland, had just taken enough energy to crack a moon, and it was speeding up, like someone had insulted it. Open communications, he said, because at this point, he was genuinely curious. 3 weeks ago, in a different part of the galaxy, nobody had been curious about Warrant Officer Daya Moro. That was, in fact, the story of Daya Moro's entire life. Curiosity-free, invisible, the kind of person who stood in a room full of decorated officers and got asked if she was the caterer. She was not the caterer. She was, technically speaking, the chief materials engineer aboard the INS Petra Olland, which sounded impressive until you understood what the Petra Olland actually did. It mapped asteroid belts. It took samples of space rocks. Occasionally, it encountered something interesting, logged it, and moved on. Exciting? Not even slightly. Dangerous? Rarely. The crew was small, 12 people, none of them soldiers. Captain Yusuf Adara, who was 62 years old and had the energy of a man who had decided that the universe owed him a quiet retirement, but hadn't got there yet. Navigation Officer Priya Sen, who was 26 and made up for her youth by being aggressively competent. Medical Officer Torben Haas, who smelled of coffee and old books and had opinions about everything. And then the rest of them, engineers and scientists and technicians, all doing their jobs, all completely unprepared for what was about to happen. What was about to happen was the Vorrkai Empire showing up in the Yellen Drift, which was technically uncharted territory, and therefore, by intergalactic convention, supposed to be off-limits for military incursions. The Vorrkai Empire had historically treated intergalactic convention the same way a large carnivore treats a politely worded sign, with complete indifference. Daya was in the materials bay when the alarms went off. She had been in the middle of running a stress analysis on a sample of Vorrkai alloy, actually, which the Empire had no idea she had, because it had been scraped off a debris field 6 months ago and catalogued under the deeply boring designation Sample 77T, and nobody ever read the materials logs. She had been looking at it for weeks because something about its molecular structure had been bothering her. The alarms, naturally, interrupted that. General alert, the ship's voice said, with the same calm tone it used to announce meal schedules. Unidentified vessels detected. Recommend crew to emergency stations. Daya grabbed her tablet, sealed sample 77T back in its container and ran. The bridge of the Petra Oland was, compared to the Vorrkai flagship, about the size of a living room, a modest living room. Captain Yusuf was standing at the center console with the expression of a man who had hoped, genuinely hoped, that his morning would not include an alien war fleet. How many? He asked. 14 ships, Priya said from navigation, not looking up. The big one in the center is a Vorrkai Unbroken class flagship. I recognize it from the Imperial Registry. That one alone carries enough firepower to vaporize a small continent. Wonderful, Yusuf said. Wonderful. And we are a geology survey vessel. Technically materials survey, Daya said, stepping onto the bridge. Yusuf looked at her. Moro, why are you here? Because I'm the chief materials engineer, and you might need me. I might need a miracle, Moro. Are you a miracle? She thought about it. Not usually, no. The comm opened without warning, which was rude, but then empires tended to be rude. It was sort of their whole thing. The face that appeared on screen was Vorrkai. Blue-grey skin, double jaw structure, 4 yellow eyes arranged in 2 pairs. Imposing. Deliberately imposing. The way a thing is imposing when it has been specifically designed and maintained to be imposing. Terran vessel, the alien said, in translator-rendered standard that was precise and cold. You are in unclaimed space adjacent to Vorrkai operational territory. Identify your purpose. Yusuf, to his immense credit, did not visibly panic. This is Captain Yusuf Adara of the INS Petra Oland. We are on a survey mission. Scientific, non-military. We pose no threat. Your presence is sufficient cause for concern, the alien said. Our presence? We're 12 people on a rock-collecting ship. A pause. Then, with the sort of contempt that takes years to perfect, surrender your vessel for inspection and processing. Processing. That word hung in the air. The crew knew what it meant. The Empire's processing of Terran vessels in contested space had been documented. It was not a gentle word. It was not a comfortable word. It was, if Daya was being precise about it, a terrifying word. Yusuf muted the comm. He looked around the bridge. He looked at Priya, who had gone very still. He looked at Torben, who was gripping the edge of a console. He looked at Daya. Options, he said. We can't outrun them, Priya said immediately. Not even close. We can't fight them, Torben added, because stating the obvious sometimes felt necessary. Daya looked at her tablet. She looked at the containment seal on her materials kit, which she had brought with her out of habit. She thought about sample 77T. She thought about the stress analysis she had been running. She thought about the thing that had been bothering her about its molecular structure for weeks. Captain, she said slowly. Moro, how long can you stall them? Yusuf looked at the view screen, where the flagship was clearly charging something large and unpleasant. Approximately, not very long. I need 17 minutes. Moro, they are pointing what appears to be a gravity weapon at us. I know. 17 minutes, Captain. Maybe 15 if I skip the calibration check, but I'd rather not skip the calibration check. Yusuf stared at her. What are you going to do? Daya was already moving toward the door. Fix something. She ran back to the materials bay at a speed that surprised her, because Daya Moro had never thought of herself as someone who ran toward problems. She was someone who studied problems, catalogued problems, filed detailed reports about problems in formats that nobody ever read. Running toward them was new. It felt strange. It also felt, she noticed distantly, kind of right. The materials bay was small, practical, and smelled of metal shavings and polymer sealant. She opened the container holding sample 77T and looked at it, because she needed to be sure before she did something that could not be undone. The Vorrkai built their warships out of this alloy, Skorreth-class hulls, the strongest military-grade material in the known galaxy, according to the Empire's own records, which they were quite proud of and quite loud about. Unbreakable, uncrackable, the foundation of their military dominance, because if your enemy cannot damage your ships, your enemy eventually stops being your enemy and starts being your subject. Except Daya had noticed something about the molecular structure, about a very specific resonance frequency that appeared in the alloy's stress response pattern, a little wobble in the data that had no reason to be there unless you understood crystallographic fatigue at the submolecular level, which, as it turned out, not many people did. It was the kind of thing you would only find if you spent 6 months running boring stress analyses on a rock-collecting ship with nothing better to do. The alloy had a flaw, not a crack, not a weakness in the conventional sense. Something more precise, a harmonic vulnerability, a frequency at which the entire molecular lattice of the Skorreth alloy would experience resonant destabilization, briefly, for about 4 seconds, during which it would behave less like the galaxy's strongest metal and more like, well, a very expensive suggestion. She knew this frequency because she had calculated it, twice, because the first time she got a number so specific and so surprising that she had assumed she had made an error. She had not made an error. She pulled up the Petra Oland's materials scanner, which was designed for geological survey work, and had a power output roughly equivalent to a very ambitious flashlight compared to military hardware, and she began to modify it. Above her she could hear the hull groan as something very large charged up outside. "Moro," Yusuf's voice came through the shipcom, tighter than before. "They have fired a warning shot. Our shields held, but barely. They are demanding surrender. I am running out of diplomatic material here." 2 more minutes, she said. "Daya." He used her first name, which he almost never did. "Whatever you are doing, please understand that I am placing a great deal of faith in you right now, which is something I do not do easily, and I would appreciate it if you did not get us all killed." "That is not my plan, Captain." "Good, what is your plan?" She made the last connection on the modified scanner. She checked the calibration reading. She allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of looking at the number on the screen, which was the resonance frequency of the Skorreth alloy, and which she was about to broadcast at full power through every emitter on the Petra Oland's hull. "My plan," she said, "is to crack their ships open like walnuts." She pressed the button. On the bridge of the unbroken verdict, every single alarm went off at once. Not the external alarms, the internal ones, the structural integrity sensors, the hull monitoring systems, the submolecular stress detectors that the Empire's engineers had installed because they were meticulous, thorough people who believed in comprehensive data collection and had never, not once, imagined that the data would ever tell them something like this. The data was telling them something like this. "Sir," said a voice from the engineering station, high and sharp with alarm. "Sir, the hull—" Drekkath turned from the viewport. "Report. The hull is? The Skorreth plating is showing stress fractures across all 14 ships. Simultaneously, sir, this is, the structural analysis is, I don't know how to say this." "Say it." "The Skorreth alloy is cracking, sir." The bridge went very, very quiet. Then Drekkath said, in a voice carefully drained of all emotion, "The Skorreth alloy." "Yes, sir. Our Skorreth alloy. The alloy that is rated to withstand a star's pressure event at close range. That alloy, yes, sir, is cracking, fracturing, microfractures, currently, but spreading. And they're coming from, sir." The source of the resonance appears to be the Terran survey vessel. Everyone on the bridge looked at the viewport, where the INS Petra Oland sat like a very small, very unremarkable ship that was somehow, inexplicably, doing the thing that Drekkath's engineers had spent decades ensuring could never happen. "What is she doing?" Yera Tolk whispered. Drekkath had no answer. That was the problem. Drekkath, who had an answer for everything, had no answer for this. The Terran vessel had not fired a weapon. It had not activated a shield breaker. It had not done anything that showed up on any weapons sensor the Empire had. It had simply sat there, 12 people in a rock-collecting ship, and it had cracked the galaxy's mightiest metal. "Open communications," Drekkath said, for the second time that morning. The screen filled with the image of the Terran bridge. The captain, Yusuf Adara, was standing in the center with the expression of a man who was deeply surprised that this had worked. Beside him stood a woman, small, unremarkable-looking, holding a tablet and staring at a screen with the focused intensity of someone doing mental math. "Captain Adara," Drekkath said carefully, "I would like to speak with your weapons officer." Yusuf blinked. "My weapons officer? The person responsible for what just happened to my fleet?" Yusuf looked to his side, at the woman with the tablet. She looked up, noticed she was on screen, and said, "Oh, your name," Drekkath said. She straightened slightly. "Warrant Officer Daya Moro, Chief Materials Engineer, INS Petra Oland." Drekkath studied her for a long moment. "Materials Engineer. Yes, you are a Materials Engineer. That is what I said." Another long pause. On the bridge of the unbroken verdict, 17 crew members were holding their breath. On the bridge of the Petra Oland, 12 crew members appeared to be doing something between laughing and crying, which was, Drekkath supposed, an understandable response to surviving something that should have killed them. Warrant Officer Moro, Drekkath said, and for the first time in years he had absolutely no idea where the sentence was going to end. I believe we should talk. There is an old Vorrkai saying that translates roughly to, the size of the threat determines the size of the response. It was the foundation of their military doctrine. It was carved into the entrance hall of the Imperial War Academy on Vorrkai. It was tattooed, metaphorically speaking, onto the soul of every officer who had ever served under the Empire's banner. Drekkath Voss was beginning to think that saying needed an update, because the threat sitting across from him in the negotiation chamber of the unbroken verdict was, by every visible measurement, not large. Daya Moro was average height, which for a human meant she stood roughly to Drekkath's collarbone. She had dark eyes that moved constantly, taking in everything, cataloguing everything, the way a scientist's eyes moved rather than a soldier's. She was wearing a utility uniform with a small stain near the left cuff that she had clearly not noticed, and she was carrying a battered tablet like it was a weapon, which Drekkath was now quite aware it essentially was. Captain Yusuf Adara had come with her. He sat to her left with the careful posture of a man who was maintaining dignity through sheer willpower. He had insisted on attending. He had also, Drekkath noted, positioned himself slightly in front of Daya in a way that was protective without being obvious, which was either instinct or habit or possibly both. Sub-Commander Yira Tolk sat beside Drekkath, her data pad in hand, her expression professionally blank. Drekkath knew her well enough to read what was underneath it. She was as curious as he was, possibly more. Yira had a scientific mind trapped in a military career, which made her very good at her job, and occasionally very restless about it. We should establish something first, Drekkath said, because someone had to start, and it was going to be him. Your vessel fired no conventional weapons. Our sensors confirmed this. Correct, Daya said. What you did to our hulls was not accomplished through any technology listed in Terran military registry. Also correct. Drekkath leaned forward slightly. Then what, exactly, did you do? Daya set her tablet on the table between them. She turned it so the screen faced him, and on the screen was a molecular diagram. Drekkath was not a materials scientist, but he had spent enough years commanding warships to know what Skorreth alloy structure looked like on a sensor readout. He recognized it. He also recognized the point on the diagram that she had circled, a small marker sitting in the middle of a lattice pattern, looking entirely innocent for something that had just caused 14 warships to develop structural fractures. Your alloy, Daya said, in the tone of someone explaining something straightforward to someone who should have figured it out already, has a resonance vulnerability at a very specific harmonic frequency. It is not obvious. It does not show up in standard stress testing, because standard stress testing does not run at the submolecular crystallographic level for sustained periods. It would take roughly 6 months of continuous analysis to isolate. Drekkath stared at the diagram. Then he looked at her. And you had 6 months. I had a slow posting and nothing better to do, she said, without a trace of apology. Yira made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and immediately turned it into a cough. Drekkath did not look at her. The Skorreth alloy, he said slowly, is the material upon which the Empire's naval superiority is built. Our ships are uncounterable because our hulls cannot be breached. Our enemies know this. Every species that has faced us in the last 4 centuries has known this. Every species that has faced you, Daya said, presumably had better things to do than run materials analysis on debris samples for 6 months. A pause. Yes, Drekkath said, presumably. Captain Yusuf, who had been sitting very quietly, cleared his throat. In the interest of moving this conversation toward a productive outcome, he said, with the careful diplomacy of a man who had been in enough difficult rooms to know how to redirect one, perhaps we could discuss what happens next. Specifically, whether the Empire intends to honor the Yellen Drift non-incursion convention, which we were technically complying with at the time of your arrival. Drekkath looked at him, then back at Daya, then at the diagram on the tablet. Here was the problem. Here was the very specific, very awkward problem that Drekkath Voss had woken up this morning with absolutely no expectation of having. The Petra Oland was a survey vessel, 12 people, no military escorts, no distress signals sent, because they had handled it themselves before anyone else knew they needed handling. Which meant that right now, the only people in the galaxy who knew that the Skorreth alloy had a harmonic vulnerability were sitting in this room. If he destroyed the Petra Oland, as operational protocol suggested he should, that information died with them. If he let them go, that information went with them. If he kept them, which was also technically an option and a profoundly uncomfortable one, he would have an incident on his hands that could escalate to full Terran-Vorrkai diplomatic crisis, which was the sort of thing that ended careers and sometimes started wars. None of these options were good. What he needed was a fourth option, and Drekkath was very aware that he was not, at this moment, the smartest person in the room. He looked at Daya Moro. "You already know what I am thinking," he said. It was not a question. She met his eyes. "You are thinking about information containment." "Yes. You are thinking that the most efficient solution to this situation is one that does not allow us to leave this ship. It has crossed my mind." "And yet," she said, "you have not done it. You called for a negotiation instead. Which means either you have a reason not to eliminate us, or you are curious enough about me to want to understand what just happened before you make a decision. I suspect both." Yusuf, beside her, went very still, because this was the kind of conversation where the wrong word at the wrong moment could determine whether they had dinner tonight or did not. Drekkath was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with something that was almost respect, "Both?" "Good," Daya said. "Then I have a proposal." The proposal was not short. Daya Moro, it turned out, was not a short proposal kind of person. She was a thorough kind of person, a documented in triplicate kind of person, and she had apparently been thinking about this since the moment she pressed the button back in the materials bay. Because the proposal she laid out in the next 40 minutes was detailed, specific, and structured in a way that made it clear she had run the variables while her captain was stalling on the common. The core of it was this: the harmonic vulnerability in the Skorreth alloy was not going to stay a secret. Daya had found it. Other researchers, given time and the right conditions, would find it too. The question was not whether it would be discovered, but who would have the advantage when it was. She was offering to work with the Vorrkai, not surrender, not capitulation, work, as in a formal research agreement, Terran Vorrkai, with her as the lead materials specialist, to develop a modified alloy that closed the vulnerability before anyone else found it. In exchange, the Petra Oland left intact, the crew unharmed, and a formal acknowledgement of the Yellen Drift Convention. "You are asking me," Drekkath said, when she finished, "to bring a human engineer into our most classified shipbuilding program." "I am asking you," Daya said, "to let the person who broke your ships help you fix them, which is, if you think about it, the most logical course of action available to you right now." Drekkath thought about it. He thought about it for longer than he usually took to think about things, because usually the answer was obvious. Usually power made things obvious. But power had not prepared him for this. Power had handed him 14 ships with microfractures in their hulls, and a woman with a battered tablet who had done it with a modified geology scanner. "What does Terran Command know about your findings?" he asked. "Nothing yet," Daya said. "I was still in the analysis phase. I had not filed a report. Had not, or chose not to." She looked at him steadily. "I had not. But I want to be very transparent with you, Commander. If we do not reach an agreement today, and if we leave here safely, I will file that report. That is not a threat. It is simply what I will do, because it is my job and my responsibility." Drekkath appreciated the transparency. He did not particularly like it, but he appreciated it, because it was the kind of clarity that let him actually calculate his position. Yara leaned close and murmured something in his ear, in Vorrkai, which the translators would not process because she had switched to a regional dialect. What she said was, "She already knows we would never let her leave if she was a genuine threat. She is offering us a way to let her leave that benefits us more than eliminating her would. She is either the most dangerous human I have ever encountered, or she is genuinely trying to solve a problem. Possibly both." Drekkath's response, also in dialect, was, "I know." He straightened in his seat. He looked at Daya Moro, Warrant Officer, Chief Materials Engineer, person who had cracked the galaxy's mightiest metal with a survey scanner and 6 months of paperwork, and he made a decision. "I need to consult with my Admiralty," he said. "Of course," Daya said. "This will take time." "We are not going anywhere," she said, and then appeared to realize how that sounded in the context of them being aboard his flagship and added, "By choice, I mean." Yusuf, beside her, let out a breath that he had clearly been holding for the better part of an hour. The consultation with the Admiralty took 11 hours. Drekkath spent most of it in his private command office, speaking through secure channels to people who could not believe what he was telling them and kept asking him to repeat it, which was exhausting. High Admiral Quen, who was 80 years old and had the patience of a geological formation, heard the full report without interrupting and then was silent for a long time. "She found it," Quen said finally, "with a geology scanner." "Material scanner," Drekkath said. Geology grade, in 6 months. Approximately, yes. And she is proposing to fix it. Yes. Another silence. Then Quen said, in the tone of someone who had lived long enough to know when the universe had made a move they had not anticipated. Approve her proposal, modified terms. She works with our team, not independently. All findings are co-classified. And Drekkath, Admiral, find out how she thinks, not just what she found, how she found it. Because if one human on a rock-collecting ship can do this by accident, I want to know what happens when they do it on purpose. Drekkath delivered the answer the next morning. Daya and Yusuf had been given quarters aboard the ship, which were Vorrkai standard, and therefore had ceilings too high and chairs at the wrong angle for human proportions. But they had managed. When Drekkath entered the room, Daya was sitting cross-legged on the floor with her tablet, making notes, which was apparently her default state of existence. The Admiralty has agreed, Drekkath said. She looked up. Modified terms? You are perceptive. You were gone 11 hours. Unmodified terms do not take 11 hours. He told her the modifications. She listened without interrupting, which he was learning was characteristic. She processed. She asked 2 questions, both precise, both relevant. Then she nodded. Acceptable, she said. You are not going to negotiate further? I got what I needed. The crew is safe. The Petra Oland leaves intact. I stay and do the work. The rest is detail. She paused. Is it unusual for you, reaching an agreement with someone you were initially planning to destroy? Drekkath considered the question. Yes, he said, considerably. How does it feel? He looked at her for a moment, then because she had been straightforward with him and he found that he preferred it. Strange, but not unpleasant. She nodded, like this was a reasonable data point. Good, she said. I find that things that feel strange but not unpleasant are usually worth pursuing. The Petra Oland left the Yellen Drift 6 hours later, with 11 crew members aboard. Captain Yusuf Adara stood on the bridge and watched it go, sitting in a command chair that suddenly felt very large for one person, and thought about the woman he had left behind on an alien flagship by her own choice, carrying a battered tablet and enough knowledge to change the balance of power in the known galaxy. He had asked her, before she transferred over, whether she was sure. She had said, I am always sure, Captain. I am sometimes wrong, but I am always sure. He had laughed. She had not. Quite, but something close to it. Aboard the Unbroken Verdict, Drekkath Voss was reading the first technical report Daya Moro had submitted, which was 12 pages long, meticulously formatted, and contained 3 separate appendices. It was the most thorough document he had received in his entire military career. It was also, when he got to the actual findings, quietly terrifying. She had not just found one vulnerability. She had found 4 harmonic frequencies, all different, all exploitable, all invisible to standard testing, all sitting there in the Skorreth alloy like small patient facts waiting for someone with enough time and the right kind of attention to notice them. She had circled the second one in the report and written, in a note at the bottom, this one is more stable than the first and would require less power to activate. I would recommend we prioritize this in remediation. Also, your chairs are at an incorrect angle for human spinal alignment, and I would appreciate an adjustment. Drekkath put the report down. He looked at the ceiling of his command office for a long moment. Then he called for Yura Tolk. Sub-Commander, he said when she appeared. Adjust the chairs in Warrant Officer Moro's working quarters. Yura blinked. Sir? And then read her report. All of it, including the appendices. He paused. And after you have read it, I want you to consider a question that High Admiral Quen asked me yesterday. What question, sir? Drekkath looked out the viewport, at the stars, at the very large and suddenly slightly more complicated galaxy that existed beyond them. If one human, on a survey ship, doing it alone, in 6 months, by accident, can find 4 structural vulnerabilities in the most advanced military alloy in the known galaxy, he said quietly, what happens when humanity decides to do it on purpose? Yura Tolk was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think, sir, that is a question the rest of the galaxy should be asking as well. Drekkath nodded slowly. Outside, the stars held their positions, indifferent and ancient, as they always had, but the balance between them, quietly, without ceremony or announcement, had shifted.